Welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, the weekly live show where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure ecosystems. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you've been with us before for Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us, especially our frequent flyers. And if this is the first time you're joining, we're thrilled to have you with us as well. Let us know in the comments what you do and what your company does within the data center industry, regardless of whether you're from a data center operator like a co-location or hyperscaler, edge, modular, wholesale data center provider, or perhaps you work in some facet of data center technology or data center facilities related company, or maybe your company does something that is part of data center construction, real estate, or maybe you're an investor in and around an institutional investor in and around the data center digital infrastructure ecosystem, or perhaps your company is part of the vibrant outsourced sales and marketing ecosystem that supports data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure. And the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show is for you, regardless of what your individual role is on the go-to-market team. Maybe you work in some part of sales, like as an account executive, an AE, an SDR, or BDR, or sales development, or business development rep, or maybe you're involved in some kind of post-purchase, post-sales, account expansion, land and expand kind of motion, customer onboarding, customer success, account management like a CSM or an AM, or perhaps you work in some facet of marketing, maybe events or field marketing, content, social media, digital marketing, product marketing, perhaps channel partner marketing. That's a whole separate area for a lot of companies in and around the data center industry. If your company has a channel partner playbook, an indirect sales playbook, in addition to your direct sales playbook, and depending on the nature of your business model, maybe you partner with like managed service providers, MSPs, or value-added resellers, VARs, or integrators, or master agents, or maybe you have some real estate related partners. And again, it all varies depending on the nature of your ideal client profile and your target buyer personas, all the cool, nifty stuff that we love to geek out all about on this particular live show. If you want to make sure that you stay in the loop and get invited to upcoming educational events just like this, be sure to subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that comes to your inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe for free directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what is on the agenda for this week's show? We're going to first look at how a data center and IT infrastructure services provider can design better sales and marketing. After that, we'll shift our attention to how a sustainable data center energy supplier generates leads. Next, we'll dive into how to identify the right contacts at liquid-cooled data centers for waste heat reuse. That's a really, really hot area right now. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk all about how to reach out to data center buyers at an earlier buying stage and why that's so incredibly important. Then we'll talk all about how to get clients for data center network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's show, we'll look at how to find big data center decommissioning opportunities. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you're currently facing, your team is currently facing, your company is currently facing, and you think this would be a good area for us to explore further on Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, be sure to leave that question or topic or challenge in the comments wherever you are watching this episode or listening to this episode, either live or later as we repurpose into the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show for the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. So without any further delay, let's dive right into this week's first topic, which takes us right into the data center technology and data center operator part of the ecosystem. So again, the data center industry, the data center ecosystem is organized into operators, technology companies, facilities related companies. We place construction, real estate, and investors all together in that fourth segment. And in the fifth segment, outsourced sales and marketing companies. So this first question is going to look primarily at professional services firms, service providers, solution providers that work with data center operators and data center technology providers. So how does a data center and IT infrastructure services provider design better sales and marketing? How does a professional services firm, a services provider that's principally in the business of working on data centers and IT infrastructure, design better sales and marketing? That is a fantastic question. What's super important to take into account is we now live in a world where buyer preferences are very, very different than they were as recently as 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I know that area that everyone tends to focus on right now in the data center industry is AI and GPUs and the implications of having hundreds of kilowatts of power needed in a single rack, crazy amounts of density, all the power requirements and utility grid shortages that are being accelerated because of these massive power requirements of these AI factories and supercomputers. However, it's not just that the power density requirements are increasing, far outstripping utility grid ability to deliver that and communities' willingness to accept that uptake. It's way more than that. It's that over the past 10 years, the way your ideal clients, the way your prioritized buyer personas research and make their purchase decisions in and around data centers and IT infrastructure has changed dramatically. 10 years ago, when we were talking about this with co-location operators and managed service providers and other parts of the data center ecosystem, you could count on the fact that most of your prospects, most of your future clients, they'd get about halfway through their research and decision-making process, and they'd be ready to talk to you. So at the time, 10 years ago, they were doing a lot of searches on Google. They were asking questions among their peers in places like LinkedIn and other social media channels. They were watching some YouTube videos, listening to some podcasts, attending some webinars, going to review websites. And at the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, did some really important research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions. And they found out that about 57% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact. So that wasn't too bad. If you did most things right, you can count on the fact that you were locked out of the game for the first half, but a little past the halfway point, a little past the halftime break, you were in there at least for the final 43, 44% of their research and decision-making process. So you could still somewhat be involved in those important conversations when your prospects and clients are figuring out what they want to prioritize and what they want to deprioritize. Add, however, there's been a lot of changes over the last 10 years. Add 10 years of digital transformation. You have millions of baby boomers retiring and a lot more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles. Tens of millions of people working from home and continue to work from home in remote and hybrid jobs that really out of necessity started in the early 2020s, but is still continuing to a great deal. And all of that has fundamentally changed the way that people research and make complex considered purchase decisions, to the point where that 57% number is now very much a point of nostalgia, very much in the rearview mirror. The latest findings published from Gartner puts that number at 83%. We actually think it's significantly higher than that already. That data probably needs a refresh because it's maybe 6, 12 months dated already. So if anything, it's 83 is low. We actually think it's considerably higher. And in certain parts of the data center ecosystem, it's hit 100% already. What that means is your prospects, your future clients will not talk with someone from your sales team, will not talk with someone from your company until they're almost ready to buy. They're 83% of the way baked. They're 83% of the way through the game before they're open to having a conversation with you. Imagine a scenario where you're a professional sports team or you're taking clients. This is something that's still pretty popular in the data center ecosystem. Imagine you're taking a group of clients or employees or channel partners or all of the above. You got a suite, a guest hospitality suite at a professional football stadium or soccer stadium or basketball arena or baseball stadium. You're having some hospitality there. And that stadium, the ownership of that stadium has just about had it with obnoxious salespeople. It was started by a whole bunch of hyper technical, very, very cynical, very skeptical IT entrepreneurs. Not that far-fetched, right? We actually see a lot of major professional sports teams in the United States that are owned by all the money that's come out of massive tech exits. Look at like Steve Ballmer, Mark Cuban owned the basketball team. There's a lot of that. So it's not that far-fetched to imagine a scenario where fan experience says no obnoxious marketing and sales crap in the stadium in the early and middle parts of the game. We'll let you in at the end. We'll let you in for the final 17% of the game. You'd say like, this is crazy. We spent 5, 10, 50 grand, whatever it is for that hospitality suite. And you're going to tell us that our guests are allowed in before the game, an hour and a half before the game, and they can spend a couple hours in there schmoozing and boozing and having a great time and socializing with everyone. But anyone with account executive or account manager or marketer on their card is not allowed in till the game is 83% of the way over. Well, that's basically what's happening is in the self-driven buyer's journey. People are doing so much research on their own before they get to you. And of course, for 10, 15 years already, it's been looking up searches and asking questions on LinkedIn and other social platforms and watching YouTube videos and podcasts and going to webinars and reading reviews. It's all of that now, in addition to ChatGPT and Copilot and Perplexity and Claude and Gemini and Grok. In other words, all of the large language model generative AI growth that is squeezing the growth rate of the data center ecosystem in ways that has never been squeezed before, crazy hockey stick growth. There's a dark side to that, a downside to that. It's certainly a change that client-facing professionals need to be aware of in the data center industry, is that your buyers, regardless of whether you sell to technology professionals or engineers or developers or some other important stakeholders in the data center ecosystem, they've become so enamored with the chat tools on their phone and on their desktop and a tablet and a watch that like you are literally in competition with the chat tools for attention. If you've ever heard one of your friends or family members or coworkers tongue-in-cheek joke that like they know someone who's in a relationship with ChatGPT or Copilot, and they treat that person as a significant other, like a spouse, and you've heard people half jokingly, half seriously say that like their kids or their grandkids a generation out from now are going to have an AI, are going to marry an AI. You start to realize that like, oh, this is for real. This is the immediate gratification that they're getting and the value that they're getting from having these conversations with these tools is so good that it changes the nature of how you hire salespeople. And we've noticed this already happening the last couple of years. We see a lot more companies in the data center ecosystem that are hiring people onto sales teams that look like the peers of the buyer personas that they're going to be selling to or that company sells to. In other words, like for example, if you're a co-location operator and your primary buyer persona are IT professionals, who would the IT professionals rather be spending time with? A stereotypical traditional salesperson who wants to schmooze them and wine and dine them and slap them on the back and take them out for cigars and drinks and shots and all that stuff? Or do they want to hang out with someone that's a lot like a peer of theirs? Matter of fact, it may be a peer of theirs because your co-location data center, for example, let's say specializes in healthcare. So they call on hospitals a lot. They call on group medical practices. And if your account executive that you recently hired spent 15 years working in various levels of organizations through big hospital systems, well, they're going to have a lot of cool stuff to talk about when they go out and they visit with other IT executives from hospitals and group medical practices. We're seeing this happen a ton across companies that sell to engineers as well. We don't see a lot of companies in and around the data center ecosystem opting for traditional used car salesperson type. I hate the stereotype with that, but we do see so much more specialization by industry. So it's always been that for like a data center and IT infrastructure services provider, it's always been that once you hit a certain scale, you're segmenting your sales team by geography. Of course, there's always been territories that goes back generations. And then the next cut within there that started about 20, 25 years ago, as SaaS was just starting to get going, is the idea of segmenting by life cycle stage. So you split up the difference between sales into sales development reps that dealt with early stage prospects and account executives that nurtured, generated opportunities and took those opportunities across the finish line. And you had account managers who worked with clients once they were over the finish line, which for a co-location data center operator is really just another starting line for any business that's based on recurring revenue and repeat purchases. So we segmented geographically, we segmented by life cycle stage. We also, as SaaS grew up into this $1 trillion industry, we got to the point where we segmented by company size. We recognized that selling a 6, 7, 8-figure enterprise sale was very, very different than selling $199 or $49 a month SaaS was self-service sign-up. So we segmented between SMB, small, medium-sized business, sometimes also known as small, medium-sized enterprise, SME, not to be confused with subject matter experts that also has the SME acronym. So we segmented by company size as well between small business, mid-market, and enterprise. Very different sales cycles, very different type of skills, a lot more stakeholders, a lot more level of sophistication necessary at various stages, at various parts of the life cycle. So in addition to segmenting sales and marketing and go-to-market teams geographically, and segmenting by life cycle stage and segmenting by customer size, we now see this fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is hiring peers of the prioritized buyer persona. So again, going back to the co-location operator, let's say you have really a lot of talents, a lot of experience with healthcare and financial services and managed service providers. So on your sales team, it would be fantastic if you had someone that worked in IT in healthcare for most of their career, or at least a couple of years. And for selling to fintech, selling to financial services, it would be fantastic to recruit someone that was an IT professional working in financial services or financial technology or something like that. And for the channel partner, the third buyer persona, the tertiary buyer persona, it'd be awesome to have someone that worked for a managed service provider or a value-added reseller or a distributor integrator or something like that, that understands channel partnerships really, really well. And this isn't something that is going to happen. It has already happened. It's come up repeatedly as we interview chief revenue officers, chief commercial officers, CEOs, everyone that's involved in building revenue teams is this extreme specialization. And the reason that it's so important is in order for your sales professionals to get back in the room in that first 83% of the journey where there's a very, very strong bias towards self-service, those sales professionals, the account executives, the sales development reps, the marketers, the account managers need to get the heck out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box. And the way they do that is to transform themselves from being seen by their traditional conventional titles to instead be seen by their modern day equivalents. What do I mean by modern day equivalents? Well, your clients, again, your prospects, they don't really want to spend a lot of time with salespeople anymore. They figured out that self-service gets rid of so much drama, puts them a lot more in the driver's seat, scratches their itch for immediate gratification. Because again, you may like to think that they're only working on these initiatives during traditional business hours and maybe a little before, a little bit after. But the reality is, especially among IT professionals, they may not have time to come up for breath to do this research and think about this initiative till 2 o'clock in the morning if they're traveling or straddling multiple time zones, or 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon on a holiday weekend. Your definition of the right time, with quotes around right, proper time, probably doesn't align with their need to be in the driver's seat and get what they want when they want. So a lot of the way for your sales team to continue to stay relevant is to, instead of being seen by the traditional job title, to instead be seen more like trusted advisor, teacher, consultant, subject matter expert. And some of the most seasoned people on your team maybe even are seen as thought leaders. And it does not happen overnight, but it almost always requires having members of your team who have very deep experience and understanding of the specific buyer personas that they're generating awareness and generating opportunities and selling to and figuring out how to solve problems for their particular client. It's deep institutional resume, CV kind of experience, LinkedIn profile kinds of experience. And it's changing the context to stop thinking about just the transaction and recognize that most of the battle is won or lost well before that 83% point. In other words, the companies that have figured this out, that recognizing that their superpower is getting their salespeople in early and often, that is the new competitive battleground. So what that means is your marketers and your sales professionals and your account managers need to reinvent themselves and reinvent a lot of what they're spending their time on to focus more on providing professional development and learning and development rather than traditional marketing, lead generation, and sales. So even with the most highly technical, highly skeptical, very cynical IT professionals and engineers that don't want to spend time with salespeople anymore, they still need to keep their skills sharp. They still need to learn. They still need to figure out what are the best practices that are driving their job function forward in similar kinds of companies in the same geographic region, companies of roughly the same size, same kind of vertical, same kind of niches. And the better job you can do with becoming extremely and staying extremely client-centric, the better job you're going to do of being able to understand what's really going on inside of these companies, inside of these job roles, figure out the best practices, bring your own subject matter experts, and create this fantastic learning and development, professional development platform that allows you to get in early and often to educate and build trust. So from a tactical perspective, for like this services provider specializing in data centers and IT infrastructure, who many times is also seen as a channel partner or an extension of technology companies or data center operators that they work with, that wants to design better sales and marketing. A lot of what that sales and marketing looks like is getting very specific on their ideal client profile. Geographically, where their clients are located, how big or small these companies are, what industries, what niches, what verticals they're in, using that to build out their target account list, depending on the nature of how big your territory is, how big your addressable market is, how expansive your team is. It's usually a couple hundred. It could be a few thousand companies that are on your radar screen. And then within those companies, how are you going to segment for the individual users and the individual stakeholders in those companies that matter most? The most important economic stakeholder that shows up on the decision committee, what we call the primary buyer persona. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of a really important stakeholder for your company based on actual research and some select educated speculation. The actual research is incredibly important. This can't just be based on assumptions or anecdotal stuff that you get from your internal stakeholders. In fact, your internal research should be no more than 20-25% of the equation. Figuring this out, most of the answers, most of the insights, 75-80% of this should come from actual research, either face-to-face conversations, Zoom calls, phone interviews, surveys, studying CRM records, for sure studying social footprint of how these folks describe themselves on their LinkedIn profiles, what kind of content they interact with, the nature of the comments, the groups they belong to, the skills they're endorsed for. We're essentially looking for our 2 or 3 most important segments, our primary, our secondary buyer persona, our tertiary buyer persona, is consensus on their biggest goals and challenges in their own words. In other words, what are the 5 or 6 big professional goals that they're working on right now, individually, as a team, and as a company, that are directly or indirectly related to data centers and IT infrastructure? And the flip side of that, in addition to the goals that tend to show up in like LinkedIn profile job summaries and the summary paragraphs up at the top, certainly shows up in job description, shows up in objectives and key results. Of course, the objectives and key results takes a certain amount of trust to get prospects and clients to share those with you. But some of the other things like job descriptions and LinkedIn profiles are certainly is no excuse for you to be lazy with all this. A lot of the insights, a lot of the magic is getting their own words. Not what you think the words are, but what the words actually are. So consensus on those 5 or 6 big goals, and consensus on the 5 or 6 big struggles, challenges, frustrations that are driving them nuts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data centers and IT infrastructure that may or may not be directly or indirectly related to your company's core business model. That's really important as well. Is the fastest way to get yourself ignored on LinkedIn and other similar platforms is to be really selfish. The best way to get your people paying attention to you is to be incredibly generous. We're sharing helpful insights that your core buyer personas, your prioritized buyer personas can use to figure out how they're going to advance their professional education, their professional career development, their learning and development, to learn how to better do their jobs based on learning what's working from other similar kinds of companies, other similar kinds of job functions. So there's 5 or 6 big challenges that are driving them nuts, that are screwing with their work-life balance, that are causing them literally be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, that may be interfering with their ability to unplug and take time off and spend time with their friends, family, and loved ones. So we need the consensus on those 5 or 6 big goals, those 5 or 6 big challenges. That gives us 10 or 12 topics for each of the 2 or 3 most important buyer personas. So then you're going to take those 10 or 12 topics, 5 or 6 big goals, 5 or 6 big challenges, and that's your calendar of events for the next 10 or 12 months. Once a month for the next year, tackle one of these systematically a month in some kind of environment where you're providing professional development and learning development for your prioritized buyer personas in your prioritized target accounts. If you have the luxury of most of your prioritized prospects and future clients being within a relatively close proximity to your facility, have these as in-person events. For like a co-location operator, it's super common to find that you have a nice conference room in a lot of your facilities that can host 15, 20 people, fantastic. If you have a classroom that hosts even a little more, that's great. The key thing with all of this, what screws up a lot of people, is there's a certain default follow the herd mentality behavior that's going on in this industry right now that puts vanity metrics on a pedestal where you get really enamored and frankly snowed. Sometimes bamboozled would be a bigger, less kind way to describe it, where you're enamored with the idea of going to conferences where there's hundreds of thousands of stakeholders, when a lot of those stakeholders, or the majority of those stakeholders, don't align with your ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas. There are many cases where it really is a good match, but I see very, very, very few go-to-market teams in this industry doing a decent job with their due diligence before they keep signing on for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or your local currency equivalent or more, to keep going back to the same conferences year after year, even if there's a terrible, atrociously bad match between your addressable market, your ideal client profile, and the demographics they attract. I always encourage people, pull up their media kit, pull up their prospectus, and look at the demographics from last year and what they project it's going to be this year. Put that on the left-hand side of your screen, and on the right-hand side of your screen, bring up your one-page ideal client profile and your prioritized buyer personas, your 2 or 3 segments, and just simply compare. Do most of the attendees at this particular conference line up with your prioritized buyer personas? If they do, great. That's at least an orange light, in many cases, a green light for you to keep going. Orange light if you don't get the opportunity to educate and build trust. If you or someone from your team is up on stage and you're teaching and you're educating and building trust, that's a big green light in my book. Strong match on the ideal client profile. You're one of the 3%, 4%, 5% of the people at that conference that's actually getting to educate and build trust. If the demographics of that conference are somewhere in the middle, like between 20 and 60% of the people attending are reasonably aligned, that's kind of a gray area. Below 20%, big red stop sign. If most of the people that are attending that conference do not line up with your ideal client profile and they do not line up with your prioritized buyer personas, what the heck are you doing there? Seriously, what are you doing there? And if you don't have the ability for you or someone from your company to have an earned speaking slot, in other words, not one where you paid, but one where you actually earned the ability to educate and build trust from the stage, the likelihood of you being successful. When people tell me that they have to get budget to pivot into doing breakfast seminars and lunch and learns or pivoting to webinars, I have no idea how they actually talk themselves into that reality. Because when you already have a facility, like a co-location data center, and you already have access to a conference room or a classroom, there could be some weird wonky internal charging mechanisms for getting access to that classroom for an hour and a half or 2 hours a couple times a month. But for the most part, it's basically free. You likely, if you're doing account-based marketing and digital marketing, and you've been at this a while, you likely have a CRM platform, a customer relationship management platform. You likely already have an email marketing program. If you send out a newsletter, if you send out regular ways to stay in touch with your prospects and clients. So you already have all of that. So when it comes to like hosting an in-person event, what are we talking about for out-of-pocket costs? Bringing in like bagels and pastries and some fruit and coffee for a breakfast seminar? What is that, for 15, 20 people, where you're bringing in your own catering or going to the deli or bakery or Dunkin' Donuts or something like that? What are we talking about? A few $100s? Same thing for lunch, salad, sandwiches, pizza, whatever it is. We're not talking about going to a conference center with $15 cups of coffee or going to a hotel with $8 cups of coffee. We're literally talking about things that are like minuscule. The out-of-pocket cost is minuscule in comparison. Because of that, you can run this kind of program on a very regular basis. Your only cost is time. And as you repeat this month after month, you're going to get better at it. You're going to get faster at it. You're going to learn. You're going to refine your playbook. And you're going to discover at some point, the only thing that sometimes holds companies back is where you don't have a great executive sponsor who's saying to the subject matter experts, like, look, this is super important. We're tired of our salespeople and our account managers and our marketers being talked down to, ghosted. The condescension by our prospects and clients is just super annoying. We know we're better than that, and it's time we let the industry know about that. So you're our expert on physical security. You're our expert on liquid cooling. You're our expert on scaling operations. You're our expert on ESG, whatever it is. You go to the individual subject matter experts in your company and say, like, for this particular segment, we've identified that they're really interested in this topic. Do you have a deck that you could present in front of this particular audience to talk about this for 20, 30, 40 minutes? Happy to sit down with you over lunch or coffee 6 or 8 weeks out and help you brainstorm through this. I'm happy to have someone from our team actually build the slides for you, so we take a lot of the heavy lifting off your plate. But it's super important that we make sure that the prioritized buyer personas from our target accounts know that we have some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with their biggest goals and challenges related to data centers and digital infrastructure. So again, if it's in person, run these as in-person events, breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, after hours versions. Every once in a while, there's a segment that justifies doing this on like a weekend, but that doesn't happen very often. Usually breakfast and lunch and learns, and sometimes in the evening is the best format, like after work. If you don't have the luxury of people being able to get to your facility within a 30 or 60-minute drive, take the exact same idea and run it as a virtual digital format. Webinars, live streams, summits, whatever you want to call it. Once a month, 10 or 12 topics covered over the next 10 or 12 months. And of course, record all of these. There's always going to be people that register that aren't able to attend. There's always going to be people that come up to you after the event and say, this was fantastic. I wish my NOC manager was here. I wish my boss was here. I wish our fractional CTO, whoever it was, should have been here. Can I get the slides? Oh, absolutely. I can give you the slides and I can give you the recording. We know that teams that learn together grow together. And that's the key thing with all of this, is that when you look at target accounts and you invite the whole team, over time, people start to become pretty receptive to your email marketing automation that goes back right after they registered and said, who else should attend? We know when it comes to cybersecurity for mid-sized hospitals in the region, it truly takes a village. It's a team. There's typically people involved from operations, engineering, support, help desk, finance, compliance. So with that, who else from your team or other teams within your company would benefit from attending? Simply hit the forward button on this message, add a thought or two, and we know the teams that learn together grow together. When you find that people that are attending these events are getting great value, they start to bring more and more people from their decision committees along with them. And you're doing something incredibly valuable. You are proactively driving alignment in the formative stages of their buyer's journey. If you've ever heard the formative years with kids, with teens, with adolescents, where you really get to shape their values, there's formative stages as well in data center related buyer's journeys. These formative stages are being able to get in early and often and being seen as an integral part of their professional development and learning development, where you can truly introduce them to your methodologies, your best practices, your rubrics, your matrices, how you approach all of this. And you'll know it's starting to work really, really well, where you see multiple people from the same company registering and attending together. And then they go back to their company and they start quoting you as part of their internal meetings. And you get, by session number 2, 3, or 4, there's so many people from the company. One of them pulls you aside and says, hey, there's like 4 of us from our company. There's only 15 people on our whole team. Next Friday, we're doing an offsite. You want to come in for a half an hour and present to the entire team? You're like, awesome. So this is how you get out of the vendor box. This is how you stay out of the vendor box. Just lather, rinse, repeat. So simple format stuff. They arrive like say it's 8:30 to 10 a.m. or something like that for a breakfast seminar. For the first 30 minutes, you have some food, you have some time for them to socialize, network with each other. The formal part of the program where you're teaching from your slides, from your workbook, your handbook, your methodology, where you're teaching so much value that if you were teaching the same session at a national and global conference, you're highly confident that you would have one of the highest rated sessions at the entire conference. You have 30 or 45 minutes. Obviously, it's a small group, so make it super interactive, lots of chance to get to know what's going on in these companies and how you could potentially add value, have a little bit of Q&A afterwards. And for anyone that wants the tour, the demo to see more, after that, you do that. In the case of a co-location facility, obviously liquid cooling, whatever it is, you take them around and show them the tour. In the case of something else, whether it's physical security, whether it's some aspect of how you handle commissioning or decommissioning or generators or fuel cells, whatever it is, show the demo to whoever wants to see, and lather, rinse, repeat. You will start to see magic things happen when you're educating and building trust, as opposed to just pitching and selling and trying to prematurely and artificially accelerate journeys for your own selfish interests. So this is what I'd be thinking about for a data center and IT infrastructure services provider that's struggling with differentiation, that really needs to strongly competitively position itself and stand out in the marketplace and design much, much better sales and marketing. The future and the present of sales and marketing is understanding just how much this buyer's journey has changed. Your buyers now very, very, very strongly prefer a self-driven journey. And the only way you're getting back in there, like you used to have it 10 years ago or longer than that, is the only way you're getting in there early and often is to stop looking like an AE or an AM or an SDR or a BDR, and instead look a lot more like a consultant, a teacher, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader. And don't BS them. They can tell that. They're highly technical, highly skeptical, a lot have advanced degrees. They need to see you as a peer, and they need to see that you're providing a tremendous amount of value that can help them individually, as a team, and as a company do better with achieving their most important professional growth goals and overcoming their most nagging, most frustrating struggles and challenges. The better job you do that with earning your way in early and often, the better job you do with being able to educate and build trust, the more beautiful things happen with opportunity generation, sales cycle acceleration, getting you the ideal clients that come across the finish line into the next finish line from account expansion and customer marketing in a very, very well aligned way. So they're truly on the same page with your internal client facing team members. So that's how I would approach how a data center and IT infrastructure services provider can design better sales and marketing. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to help us spread the word by hitting the like button on whatever platform you're watching on. And if your platform you're watching allows for reviews and ratings, we'd love to get that from you as well. So what's up next? Our next question is going to take us into the data center facilities side of the data center ecosystem. So how does a sustainable data center energy supplier generate leads? How does a company that is a sustainable energy supplier in and around the data center ecosystem generate leads? That is a terrific question. And a lot of it really depends on how confident you are in nailing down your product market fit and go-to-market fit, and potentially your channel partner market fit. Product market fit is something that's talked about at great length at relatively early stage companies. And anytime a company is entering a new market, going after a new segment, launching a new product or service, product market fit is the degree to which you have clarity around who your ideal clients are, what products or services they purchase from you, the price points at which they purchase those from, the durations, the frequency of repeat purchases, the terms, basically all of the unit economics, things like average client lifetime value, LTV, cost of client acquisition, COCA, sometimes also known as client acquisition cost, or CAC, average sales cycle length, margins, basically all the stuff that gets your CFO and your board of directors super excited, or hopefully super excited about having really strong grasp on the metrics and key performance indicators that move your revenue growth forward. So that's product market fit. And a lot of people mistakenly believe that it's something that's only relevant for startups, but no, it really is relevant for any size company that's moving into new segments and moving into new products that they haven't had experience with before in the past in a particular geographic region. Like you could have product market fit, for example, in the Americas, and all of a sudden you decide to branch out into APAC, Asia Pacific, or EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And each one of those regions, you're learning. And you may learn relatively quickly that most of those regions are not as homogenous, not as straightforward as cracking the code on marketing and selling and expanding in the Americas. For example, Latin America, way more challenging than a lot of people give it credit for, with figuring out it's way more than just localization. So yes, product market fit is a big deal for companies of all sizes, and in a dynamic marketplace where there's always new use cases, new market dynamics, new competitive forces at work, new buyer preferences, new buyer behaviors. It's always changing. Go to market fit is the degree to which you have figured out how you're going to scale your sales organization. Like, in other words, for relatively small companies, you start out with founder-led growth, and then you get to the point where you've got enough reps, and then you start to come up with a sales process that can be sold by mere mortals who aren't the founder of the company. And you hire your first couple of sales reps, you hire your first sales manager, sales director, you scale that up from a couple to a couple dozen to a couple hundred. As you're scaling that up, you're going through what's called go-to-market fit. It's figuring out how, as you add more capital into the business, not only does lead generation and opportunity generation and sales closing continue to work, but your client retention and addressing things like churn doesn't get out of control either. It's basically making sure that the wheels don't fall off as you add more capital into the business. And this is something that's super important for any company that's looking to do a capital raise, like venture capital, private equity, or even taking on debt, as being super, super clear to make sure that you have a strong sense of product market fit and go-to-market fit. Channel partner market fit is the channel partner version of that. It's recognizing that, okay, you want both a direct and indirect sales force. And essentially, like in the case of a co-location operator, you might have managed service providers and value-added resellers and integrators and agents that are channel partners of yours, working as an extension of your marketing team and your sales team and your services and your support team. And now do you know exactly who these companies should be and why they should be a partner? And can you adequately support what they truly need to be successful in marketing and selling and supporting your services to their particular clients? Once you have that all figured out and you have nicely buttoned down case studies and best practices playbooks and a nice channel partner part of your website and one or more people sitting on your LinkedIn company page and your about team page that have the word channel or partner or ecosystem in their job titles, once you have that figured out, you've achieved channel partner market fit. And as you move into new segments, both geographically, by size, by industry, all of the above, you're always figuring out and continuing how to refine this. Why is this super important for figuring out how a energy supplier generates leads, a sustainable energy supplier generates leads? Because from a consulting and advisory perspective at DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, we see an alarming amount of early stage companies, especially in this particular segment, energy, that prematurely try to get channel partners signed up, even before they've really fully built out their own internal sales team. And the reason that that's a problem is, one is the channel partners that say yes to that are usually folks that haven't been around the block and they don't know the right questions to ask. And the channel partners that you really do want know how to ask the tough questions about what I'm talking about exactly here, and like, come back when you're further along. The problem is, you're basically, when you hire an account executive, when you hire a sales development rep, when you hire marketers, when you hire account managers, they're working for you full time. 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They're 100% all in on growing their career with your particular company. When you recruit channel partners, by very definition, they are not full-time with you. They're fractional. They're not half-time. They're not quarter-time. Like, for an energy supplier that's looking to recruit an MEP firm or an engineering firm or someone like that to be a partner of theirs, by very definition, they may have channel type or partner type of relationships with 10, 20, 30 different firms like yours. Let's say it's 20. So what that means is you're only getting 5% of that person's attention, not 100% of that person's attention, like a full-time salary person. You're only getting 5%. So let's say 1 day a week, they work on these relationships. So what that means is 1 day a week is you're getting 20% of their week they're working on these kind of ecosystem relationships, and you're one of 20. So you have 8 hours a week, 480 minutes divided by 20 pieces. What does that work out to? 24 minutes a week? Maybe. How much impact can you have with that person in 24 minutes a week if you're still figuring out things yourself? In order for your channel partners to be successful generating leads, they need a very, very well figured out playbook from you on what's working for your internal team members that you've codified and figured out in a way that's someone can execute on, that can only spend 2 hours a month with your company in a business development capacity. 2 hours a month, not 160 hours a month, but 2 hours a month. And when you start to think about it like that, you're like, yeah, I don't want to ruin my chance with these individuals at these particular companies because we're prematurely selling them on something that's going to belly flop. And it's not so much that your product or service from an energy platform is bad, as an energy supply platform is bad. It may be that it's perfectly fine for how you sell this directly, but you're struggling to figure out how to get other partners outside of your company, how to be able to market and sell that successfully on a channel partner basis, where they're only paid success fees based on revenue that they bring through the door. So yeah, there's 2 or 3 different levels of figuring this all out. And that's, again, one of the huge problems with lead generation, especially among energy companies that I see, is prematurely trying to shed fixed costs into variable costs before your company is truly ready to provide the kind of support that the referral partners, the channel partners, would need on a pay per performance only basis, because your brand just isn't built up. That's why a lot of companies that look for that won't touch an energy supplier company below 5 or 10 million in annual revenue, below like 50 employees or your local currency equivalent, or below 50 employees or something like that, because they know early on you don't have a brand. There's no reputation in the marketplace. People are barely talking about you. You're still figuring things out. Who the heck knows if you even have enough capital to sustain yourself long enough to actually install and service those clients long term for what they're looking for with the ramp and project length and everything that comes into play. So again, this is part of the reason why early on for lead generation, you need to figure these things out internally. And when you do that, the only way that you're going to have successful lead generation is to have a lot of clarity among your ideal clients. Where they're located with an energy supplier, the geographic part is incredibly important. How big or small these companies are. In other words, like, you know what your minimum project is. For most energy suppliers, that at least the ones that land in my inbox, we're talking about that their potential clients need to be like at least mid-size or enterprises. They're not going to have a lot of success with small businesses just because their minimum engagement level is so high. So like they're setting a floor at like 200 employees or 500 employees or something like that. But they also know that they're not really ready for the big time quite yet. They're not going to be successful selling this energy supplier relationship when they're just getting going to Meta or Microsoft or Alphabet or something like that, or Apple or Oracle or something. They're kind of like figuring out the Goldilocks, what's not too big, what's not too small. So they may end up with a band of like ideal clients in their ideal client profile companies that are anywhere from like 200 employees up to like 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees or something like that. A very large mid-market, a very small, a small kind of enterprise before they get outmatched with requirements that company would have that they just simply can't deliver on. And then there's certain verticals and business models that may be a particularly better fit. So until you have clarity around those 3 dimensions of your ideal client profile, it's nearly impossible to build a target account list, and it's nearly impossible to figure out your buyer persona segmentation strategy, which are all vital to getting a good lead generation program going. And early on, it's important enough to have humility that your most important job is to accelerate the race to product market fit. Everything is an experiment, everything is learning. And don't use, as much as you don't want to use your clients as lab rats, you also don't want to use your channel partners, your referral partners, as experiments either. You want to be running the experiments directly, ideally with the founders of your company until you figure this out, and then you hire in a methodical way that continues to build upon previous successes. So again, it's not just that, it's that recognizing that intentional lead generation requires a deep understanding that your buyers don't buy the way they did 10 years ago. What does that mean? It used to be that if you pounded the cold calls and pounded the cold emails and the cold LinkedIn messages as hard as possible, you'd get some of the right people that were willing to meet with you, and they were about halfway through their research and decision-making process. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, found that about 57% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact or sales contact. That's now long, long gone. We're now live in a world where most of the journey is over before you ever meet a prospect, like 83% or more of the way over before you're able to influence, be able to shape their criteria for how they look at sustainable energy. So the only way we're getting you back in there is to stop thinking like a traditional energy supplier and instead think of how you can be a part of your prioritized buyer personas, professional development and learning and development. Regardless of their job, in this particular case, you're probably selling to like data center developers, you're selling to engineers, you're selling to ESG folks, you're selling to utility managers. And again, this is all figuring out your business model where you do best, where they get the most value based on your current roadmap of what you deliver today and what you're going to be delivering in the very, very near immediate future. Once you figure that out, you're going to very quickly realize that most of the people that you want to get a foot in the door with don't want you to have a foot in the door until they're almost ready to buy. Early on, they're doing tons of research, search, social, YouTube, podcasts, webinars, review websites, and now, of course, massively impacted by all the generative AI LLM tools. They're not even asking questions, they're having conversations with ChatGPT and Copilot and Gemini and Claude and Perplexity and Grok. These are the same kind of conversations that they used to have with a human like yourself 10 years ago, except now they're having it with the chat app because the chat app doesn't put them through the ringer. It doesn't make them jump through all these crazy prospecting, selfish kinds of hoops that help you get some interim victories on the board and some high fives from your boss that really many times are just shallow high fives because you're really not moving the needle. So you are in competition with the attention that not only is commanded by social media and search and content and thought leadership, but you're in direct competition with the exact kind of generative AI apps that are fueling all the growth in the data center energy and data center energy segment and all the need for energy in the first place. And the sooner you wake up to that reality, the easier it is for you to adjust your approach and your strategy to focus on not being seen as an account executive of sustainable energy, but instead being seen as a sustainable energy teacher, consultant, subject matter expert, trusted advisor, perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything that is incredibly relevant directly or indirectly to that particular buyer persona in that kind of company at the intersection of sustainable energy. And you figure out what those topics are by doing your customer insight research, becoming a lot more client-centric. And when you have those 10 or 12 topics, your new strategy to get in early and often largely comes down to how well of a job you're going to do at educating and building trust throughout the full journey, not just getting in there for the final 15% and pretending like you have a shot. No, you do not have a shot. You're not even close. Even undercutting on price will not give you a reasonable shot. They've already fallen in love with another company. You're too late, baby. It's too late. Sorry, Carol King. It's super important for you to be able to shape the criteria early and often. And the way to do that is instead of looking like a traditional sales professional in sustainable energy, to instead look a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor who has the attention of the right people in the right company, multiple stakeholders from that company over their full journey. And the better job you do at that, the more education and trust building you do, the more you're able to shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different competitive options in your category. And this is a great question that I'm so glad it was asked in this week's show, because several times a year, including as recently as in the last 24 hours, I get salespeople from energy suppliers that are trying to get me to take our brand and our reputation when we know nothing about these companies and go rep their companies in front of our clients and co-marketing partners. And they have no success track record of having done this with other third parties. They don't have channel partner market fit. In many cases, they don't even have go-to-market fit. I look at the LinkedIn profiles, I look at the websites. They need a ton of work on being brand credible in today's self-driven buyer's journey, because I'm looking at them with even less skepticism than one of their target buyers would look at, and I'm not taking them seriously. So like, there is a massive amount of work, a massive amount of remediation work, foundational work that needs to be done with some of these earlier stage companies before they're ready to go step on the gas with lead generation and opportunity generation and hiring internal sales. Way, way, way premature for them to be thinking about trying to scale a commission-only sales force. What they like about a commission-only sales force is it doesn't require anywhere near the capital or dilution or debt or anything like that as putting salaried people on with a base and OTE and on target earnings and everything like that. But the reality is they're premature. They're showing up on the first date and they're saying, "You look pretty hot. You look pretty sexy. Why don't we get married on the first date?" It would make for a really funny romantic comedy movie. Nobody wants to be in your romantic comedy movie. This isn't Ashton Kutcher and Cameron Diaz and Mila Kunis and everything trying to get some laughs on the screen. If we're talking about trying to educate and build trust, getting in there early and often, we need to meet them where they are right now. Not where you'd like them to be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but where they are right now. And educate and build trust and share the best practice and the methodologies about how others in similar kinds of job functions and similar companies in this region have addressed very similar kinds of concerns around sustainable data center energy usage. And the better job you do at that, the more welcome you're going to be with open arms. The more you ignore that, the more they're going to look at you as a used car salesperson. And we don't want you to be the used car salesperson. We want you to be seen as the expert, the trusted advisor, the teacher, the consultant. And if you yourself doesn't have that expertise, that's not a problem either. But what you need to do is go to someone internally in your company that does, and you're now the moderator, you're the tour guide, you're the concierge that brings in these other expert resources from your company. Because again, the self-driven buyer's journey doesn't really have a lot of room anymore for people that just want to read a website or read slides to you. That's why we see across the board, most of these super savvy teams within this ecosystem are hiring people in sales roles who look a lot like peers of the buyer personas that they're marketing and selling to. And the sooner you get in tune with that reality and adjust to it, the better it's going to be for you and your team and your company. The more you fight it kicking and screaming, the more likely it is that your career is risking obsolescence and premature oblivion, as that 83% number jumps to 93, 98, 99. There's parts of the data center ecosystem that have already gone 100% self-service. If you've been around SaaS or infrastructure as a service or public cloud, you know the ecosystems, the marketplaces have been wildly successful, and they continue to be more successful. I continue to interview some fantastic entrepreneur founders on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast who are building marketplaces to lean into these self-service buyer preferences. If you want to survive and thrive in the coming months and in the coming years with your career, it is so incredibly important, regardless of whether you're in energy or some other adjacent facet of facilities or technology or data center operator, construction and real estate. Your prospects and clients don't need you to read the website to them anymore. They don't need you to read slides to them, but they do still need help. And the better job you can do with helping them as an expert, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, the more they're going to want to spend time with you. The less you do that, the less time they're going to spend time with you. So that's the lead generation strategy. Of course, from a tactical perspective, premium content, conversion paths, landing pages, email nurturing, webinars, in-person webinars, breakfast seminars. This is all stuff these are all strategies, tactics, and playbooks that are very, very well established, highly effective throughout the data center ecosystem. A lot of companies in the space have been at this for 10, 15 years already, doing this at a phenomenal world-class level. If your company hasn't been doing this, has been asleep at the wheel, and has somehow managed to coast on fumes, this isn't because your buyers aren't ready. It's because you're living in a bygone era. Unfortunately for you, your prospects are not. even baby boomers that are still working in many cases on a part-time advisory basis, but the ones that are working full-time in the data center ecosystem, they're all digitally transformed. You want to test this out, go to a data center conference where you see a panel or you see a speaker who's clearly in the later stages of their career. They're 40 plus years of experience, and they're up on stage giving this fantastic question. You take a picture of their slide and you mention them in a LinkedIn post. Hey, I really love what you're talking about with Liquid Cooling. It makes so much sense for how companies should be positioning this to their finance and compliance team. Loved it. And you mentioned them, you'd be shocked how quickly it happens when they're off stage, when they hit the like button and they comment and you're so glad you're able to attend my session today. I was really glad to have you. Really glad. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. Like within minutes, they're on LinkedIn all day long. So if you're thinking that your buyers are different, that your buyers are special, what, they don't use smartphones, they've never heard of Google, they've never heard of ChatGPT, they've never heard of YouTube or webinars, I don't know who you think you're selling to. Do your homework, do your customer insight research, figure out how you can be client-centric and change your lead generation strategy so you're seen as the be-all end-all expert and your company is seen as the be-all end-all world-class experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with sustainable data center energy supply. So that's how a sustainable data center energy supplier can generate leads. I hope some of the incredibly confident people that have landed in my inbox in this category over the last several months are actually listening, because there's a massive amount of value in the playbook that but if you're not, I can't help you. If you're content with having 20 LinkedIn connections on your profile in the 2020s, if you're okay with thinking that your website doesn't need to be hosted on a secure platform and that basic trust marks and all this stuff, that I don't know how to help you. If you think that somehow your buyers are different, that they want you, what are you thinking? That they want you to send them a direct mail campaign, advertise in a printed trade journal, come across your company's ad in the yellow pages, waiting for a fax from your company? What do you think they're doing? Figure out who your buyers are. Get client-centric. Understand what's going on in their world and figure out how you can show up in a way that adds value to their professional lives long before you try to extract value back out of it. I don't care how hot the job market is. They're still the buyers. They are still in the driver's seat. And the better job you do with understanding what's going on in their world and adding value to it, the better off things are going to be for you when it comes to anything and everything that's directly related to your sustainable data center energy lead generation strategy. Enjoying this week's show so far? Be sure to help spread the word and hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on. Okay, what is up next? Another facilities related question. This is a great one. And what's really interesting about this particular one is I'm not sure I've seen that many companies that are going all in on both parts of it. So the question is, how do we identify the right contacts at liquid cooled data centers for waste heat reuse? How do we identify the right contacts at liquid cooled data centers for waste heat reuse? That is a terrific question. Like I said, I don't know of that many use cases where people are executing at all, let alone at a world-class level on both of these. So let's just unpack what's really going on here. So liquid cooled data centers, there's a couple different strategies for liquid cooling, but what they all come down to is recognizing the traditional hot aisle, cold aisle containment strategies that aren't effective anymore when you have massive amounts of kilowatts and moving to a world where there's hundreds of kilowatts in a single rack with these extremely dense racks that are loaded with GPU power hungry servers. So liquid cooling obviously is extremely powerful, whether we're talking about direct to chip, whether we're immersing the servers in vats or some other type of method, for sure, is becoming really the default playbook and is making plumbers and technologists and engineers having to get a lot better at being able to integrate and work together. Waste heat reuse. What waste heat reuse is basically all about is recognizing that data centers generate massive amounts of heat. And if we have a residential use or a commercial property that is immediately adjacent to the data center, that excess heat can be funneled into something useful as opposed to just being seen as an exhaust and a byproduct that doesn't have value. So a perfect example of this would be, and I've had a handful of some founder entrepreneurs from Europe especially that are really going all in on waste heat reuse. And I'll give shout outs to a couple of them here and mention the ones that are particularly notable. So in the UK, Deep Green is famous for the case study a couple of years ago of putting a data center in a swimming pool, of basically having a data center that is built adjacent to an indoor community pool and using the heat that's come off of that data center to heat that pool. Go a little further north into Scandinavia, into the Nordics, into Sweden, and I've hosted interviews with T-Loop and Scandinavian data centers that are also all in on waste heat reuse. In the case of using heat for hot water in commercial and residential buildings, like for hot showers, for laundry, for heating greenhouses, and that part of the world where you want to be able to grow fruits and vegetables year round. It's pretty expensive to heat greenhouses using traditional carbon-based fuels. But what if that cost of heating it was zero because the heat was coming off of a data center that was built adjacent to the greenhouse? And there's other use cases as well. There's a couple of test projects that are being kicked around in the US, including one notable one in San Jose, California. But the idea basically is that data centers, especially data centers that are running GPU-centric, very high-density workloads, generate a ton of heat. And if you can have a residential or commercial or some kind of agricultural use that is built adjacent to the data center, then all of a sudden you have free heat. So that's what waste heat reuse is all about. At some point, there's hopefulness that there'll be some transmission lines and storage mechanisms, but right now it really needs to be adjacent. So what that argues both for and against is, in Europe, a lot of data center operators have done a really good job with having decentralized data centers, lots of data centers that are closer to where there could be these use cases. Whereas in the US, it's a lot more common for these huge hyperscale facilities to be located out in the middle of nowhere, where there's no real residential or commercial use case that could be adjacent to there that's doing much with the waste heat reuse. So these concepts of a liquid cooled data center and waste heat reuse could be mutually exclusive, but in a lot of cases, they would tend to go together. There's more heat being generated when there's more power density, more kilowatts in a rack eventually. Crazy high megawatts and gigawatts in a single facility that can heat a small city with the excess waste that's coming out of that. So how do we identify the right contacts at liquid cooled data centers for waste heat reuse? So essentially what you're looking for is to generate a target account list, an ideal client profile of liquid cooled data centers that are candidates for looking at what can be done for waste heat reuse. The way I would approach this is waste heat reuse is very geographically dependent. So in other words, you not only need to have a use case that can be built adjacent to the data center, you need to have physical presence in that particular region. What's super interesting about the couple of companies that I've interviewed in Europe that are basically data center operators that are all in on waste heat reuse, the two that are in Sweden and the one that's in the UK, is every single one of them have eyes on expanding at least part of their business into the US market. Why? You look at the infographics of the number of data center facilities in the US compared to pretty much any other market on the planet, and there's a lot more opportunities for growth. There's a lot more data centers, and there still are a lot of opportunities for waste heat reuse. The general consensus when I've talked to experts about this is the first use cases will likely be in cooler climates. In other words, waste heat reuse from a data center is a lot more valuable in January to a data center that's in Boston or Minneapolis than it is to one that's in Miami. In January in Miami could be 60, 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas in Minneapolis, it could be at or below zero, similar to New England and other extreme parts of the US. So there's definitely some geographic portions of this that will make it more accessible. But again, the idea is you really, for the way the infrastructure technology works today, is that adjacency of the building being like literally right there is super important. So some of these issues really need to be thought at the time of like urban planning and proximity and zoning. And some parts of the world are in better shape for addressing that, and others, master planners, city planners, and things like that, will over time be thinking a lot more about these issues. And there's certainly a lot of needs for education. So if you want to be able to identify the right context of liquid cooled data centers, it's any data center that probably more than, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, it's hard to have a definite answer on this, but it's any data center that's built in the last 2, 3, 4 years that aspires to have GPU centric racks that isn't at total capacity, as a candidate for liquid cooled data centers. It's hard to imagine a scenario where we're 5 or 10 years out and most data centers won't be liquid cooled. There'll still be some that have conventional workloads, where they're more competing with like traditional public cloud workloads, but instead hosting them in a private colocation kind of environment or running public cloud. But yeah, increasingly there's going to be a lot more. So the idea, I think this concept of liquid cooled data centers being the exception rather than the rule, I think we're 5 years away for most data centers being liquid cooled out of necessity. Certainly anything that's being built from scratch now, where they have aspirations of being able to host high density workloads like that, will have to be liquid cooled. So it's basically, it's most data centers going forward. So then the question is like for waste heat reuse, it's an idea of understanding like what is currently built or what could be built adjacent to that property that enables them to make good use of the heat that's coming off of that. So far, again, most of the most popular use cases have been swimming pools, hot showers, and agriculture and greenhouses. I'm sure there will be more over time. I'm sure there will be storage devices and transport innovations over time that help with that. But those are the use cases that I'm aware of right now. And if you're super curious about learning more about waste heat reuse, I'll include links to the podcast interviews with executives, with founders from Deep Green in the UK and Scandinavian Data Centers and T-Loop in Sweden. I also interviewed John Summers from RISE. It's a government nonprofit partnership research organization also in northern Sweden that's spent a lot of it aligned with OCP, the Open Compute Platform. Did a lot of early work with Facebook, Meta on defining the standards for the Open Compute Platform, and has done a lot of work around heat reuse as well. And again, I wish I had a ton of resources to send you to on other parts of the world, especially in the Americas, where this has become super popular, but it really hasn't yet. I know it hasn't yet because I'm nearly certain that some of the people that have watched the podcast interviews that I've done with the founders and the disruptors in Europe approaching this would be knocking on my door quite hard to get similar kind of coverage on the podcast for heat reuse case studies in the US. They're coming. It hasn't come quite yet. So when it comes to identifying the right contacts at liquid cooled data centers for water heat reuse, you're probably going to, because of the sustainability directives in Europe, you probably have a much more receptive audience there because of the renewable energy credit type strategies in many markets in Asia Pacific. You'll probably have a more receptive audience there. I don't know how receptive of an audience you're going to have for it in the US. There certainly is a lot of potential there. Haven't seen it tapped into quite as well, but that's what I'd be focusing on. I'd be looking to create a lot of great content and thought leadership on these particular topics, on best practices for thinking through sustainability and getting more value and being having better community impact with liquid cooled data centers and waste heat reuse. I mean, certainly there's a lot of data center developers, wholesale data center operators, data center real estate investors that are facing an enormous amount of friction with community stakeholders in various markets where they want to build these facilities. Northern Virginia is the one that comes to mind as the one with the biggest flashpoint, but it's certainly going on in many other regions around the US. And if you can talk about waste heat reuse, so they're building a community pool or a health club or something like that, or a greenhouse or university research facility or something adjacent to the data center, and all of a sudden they're getting all this free energy. I don't know if that'll solve all the pitchfork kind of moments with the angry community stakeholders and activists, but it'll certainly go a long way to starting to mitigate some of that. So I think in the coming months, in the coming years, we're going to see a lot more people. We're going to see a more rollout of this on a global basis, including in the US. It's just I haven't seen that much of it. Liquid cooling is definitely doing extraordinarily well globally, and including in the US. Just heat reuse is, I think, predominantly something that we're seeing in Europe and a little bit of Asia at this point. My prediction, again, is we'll see a lot more of it in the Americas, but we're not there quite yet. So identifying the right context of these liquid-cooled data centers for waste heat reuse, keep publishing, keep distributing, get known as the top expert on waste heat reuse for these particular markets, and just focus on getting in front of most of the right stakeholders that are focused on sustainability, governments, environmental, that are focused on energy management, that are focused on development, because nearly all new data centers that are being constructed going forward by default are going to be planned with a liquid heating component if there's any kind of significant density involved. So that's what I'd be thinking about for identifying the right context at liquid cooled data centers for waste heat reuse. That brings us to our break, our mid-episode break for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. When we'll come back, we'll tackle 3 more of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the data center ecosystem. See you in a moment.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. And you're tuned into this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about throughout the global data center ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you'd like to see us address on an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching on, and we'll add that to the consideration queue for upcoming episodes. Okay, so what is up next? Next, we're going to talk about how to reach out to data center buyers at an earlier buying stage, how to reach out to data center buyers at an earlier buying stage. Yeah, this is a great one. And I think it's incredibly important because so much budget right now, so much resources throughout the global data center ecosystem are being overinvested at the latest stages of the journey when there's really not much of a chance to impact strategy and preferences, and being starved away from the early and the middle stages of these buying journeys. The reason I say that is in most cases, companies are spending insane percentages of their annual resources for go-to-market sales and marketing on big national and global conferences. And some of them are doing this with a pinky toe in the pool, where they're sending 1 or 2 people from their organization to just attend and network a little bit in the hallways and set up some meetings. A lot are diving in to the deep end with 5 or 10 members of their team and spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, on individual events by getting a booth. And we all know that if you figure out the spreadsheet on what the booth actually costs, it's way, way, way more than the cost of the actual booth to the conference company by the time you get done with the fully loaded costs. And then there's some that are working it really, really smart, where they're focusing primarily on getting on stage, or someone from their team getting on stage and educating and building trust from the platform. Unfortunately, in most conferences, typically only 3 or 4 or 5% of the people that are attending are actually getting to educate and build trust, where they have an earned speaking slot, either as like a solo keynote or a breakout session or a panel. The panels aren't nearly as valuable as a solo breakout session or a keynote, but it's certainly better than nothing. At least you're getting to share the stage for that 30 or 45 minutes with 3 or 4 other people. But at the end of the day, if we think about typical conference, 2,500 people, 75 speakers, so roughly 3% get to educate and build trust. Usually those 75 people are bringing along like an average of 2 people from their companies. So all in, maybe 225, 250 people of the 2,500 at that conference are either educating and building trust or in a position to capitalize on their boss or their coworker that's educating and building trust. What about the other 90% of the people at that event? Well, Another 10, sometimes 20% of the people at the event, another 250, sometimes as many as 400 or 500 at that event, are there primarily to staff the booths. They're there primarily to work the expo floors. And what they're hoping to do is capitalize on some of the goodwill that's been built up by the speakers who are educating and building trust from the stage. The other 80% of the people that are there, they're the product. They're the captive audience. There's no conference if that other 70 or 80% of the people are not at the conference, literally. Why would companies pay tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands to exhibit at that conference if there was no audience? Why would people travel to and offer to speak for free without a speaking fee and bring other people from their team if there was no captive audience? So they're literally the product. I don't know why among highly technical, highly educated IT professionals in this industry that no one understands what's truly going on in these ecosystems. But the reality is only 3 to 5% of the people that are there actually get to build trust, and maybe 10% if you take into account the coworkers. And as far as my North Star goes with everything that helps you be successful in today's self-driven buyer's journey throughout the global data center ecosystem, it all starts with educating and building trust. That is the competitive battleground. Are you really educating and building trust by sponsoring a party? Seriously, are you able to educate and build trust with the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context? Do they see you as trusted advisors, teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, and thought leaders because you hosted a cocktail party poolside at the Cabana? Well, it was a lot of fun, right? But did you educate and build trust? How about the golf tournament? Did they leave your sponsored golf tournament thinking of you as trusted advisors, as educators, as consultants, as thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with your segment of the data center industry? Might have had fun. Hopefully they had fun. But are you really educating and building trust? How are you going to transform behaviors? How are you going to get that individual to go to bat for you with their coworkers across the rest of the decision committee if you're not educating and building trust? Educating and building trust is what it's all about. So when it comes to getting to buyers at an earlier buying stage, recognize that even when you're able to get to the right conference, where there's a strong match between their demographics and your ideal client profile and your targeted buyer personas, even when you are on stage, keynote, breakout session, panelist, you're one of the chosen 3% to 10% that gets to educate and build trust. Even in that scenario, it's very possible that you weren't in early enough. You're certainly getting to do some education and trust building, but the reality is only 5 to 10% of the people are in market ready for a sales conversation at any given time. And there's typically going to be 28 touch points between complete stranger, 25 to 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. You may have done a fantastic job with that one touch point, but what are you going to do next to stay top of mind with that individual and the rest of their coworkers throughout that full considered buyer's journey? This is where an enormous amount of dropping the ball happens post-conferences. If you don't have a good email marketing program, if you don't have a good event marketing program, if you don't have a way of continuing to educate and build trust and bring them back month after month to spend time with your client-facing subject matter experts, you're going to lose. Because at this stage of the game, you are certainly not the first company in the data center ecosystem that said, gee, maybe we should do better webinars. Maybe we should do more webinars. Maybe we should do breakfast seminars. Maybe we should have courses, an academy, a training center. You're not going to be the first company that's come up with this idea of trying to teach and consult and be trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders. It's been a very, very well invested playbook for 10 or 12 years, but for sure, there are significant parts of the data center ecosystem that thinks that your prospects can be bribed. You can pay them off. Bring them to a really expensive sporting event. We'll get them tickets to the Super Bowl, and they will for sure buy from us. We'll have this fantastic party. They'll for sure buy from us. I don't know. Maybe you're getting compromising pictures of them enjoying the open bar a little bit too much, and that's your hidden sales strategy. Hope not. There's a lot of ethical issues with that, but the reality is we need to educate and build trust early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So they see you and your client-facing team members as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with your segment of the data center industry that perfectly aligns with the biggest goals and challenges that that individual is dealing with right now. How do we know what those goals and challenges are? How do we know what those magical customer insights are? Because we did our homework. We didn't guess. We didn't make stupid assumptions. We didn't try to copy off of our classmates' homework like you're back in high school. No, we actually went directly to our prospects and clients and we did the research. We did the face-to-face interviews. We did the Zoom interviews. We did the calls. We studied the CRM. We did the surveys. We looked at their LinkedIn profiles. We amalgamated all this together and we got in their own words what their 5 or 6 biggest goals are right now, their biggest initiatives that they're working on individually as a team and as a company at the intersection of what we do. And we figured out what's driving them nuts, what they're struggling with the most, what the biggest challenges are when it comes to anything and everything that's related to our part of the industry. And we brought all of that together and we've decided that we're not going to roll over. We're not going to phone it in. We need to dramatically improve the surface area that we have throughout the full buyer's journey, not just in the last 17%, not just in the last 5 or 10%, but a full 100% of the buyer's journey. And the way we do that is we take those 10 or 12 big goals and challenges, and every single month we're showing up and we're inviting them to come learn with us as an integral part of their professional development and as their learning development. You want to get out of the vendor box and stay out of the vendor box? Figure out a way to get your sales professionals and your account managers and your marketers to run a fantastic world-class professional development, learning and development platform for your most important prioritized segments with the strongest unit economics. You don't have to do this for everyone quite yet, but I would certainly, if you're selling 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure initiatives, I would massively saturate the surface area with the most important people on those decision committees with having phenomenal world-class training and educational events that are so valuable that it feels like you ought to be charging for them. Except instead, at the end of the day, our end game is to educate and build trust and proactively drive alignment across multiple stakeholders from that company month after month, quarter after quarter. We recognize that, okay, we won the lottery. We're educating and building trust from the stage with that particular contact. We got a touch point. But if we're not in there for a significant amount of the surface area for those other 25 or 30 touch points, you're going to lose to a competitor. It could be a direct competitor, the obvious ones you know about. It could be an indirect competitor that you massively underestimate because you think their company is too big or too small to be relevant or not geographically relevant. But no, they're still in on it. Or it could be a non-business model competitor. These are the ones that totally catch everyone off guard. These are companies that don't do what you do, but still create phenomenal educational content and educational events on your particular topic. In a lot of ways, ChatGPT and Copilot are a non-business model competitor to nearly all of us. I guess if you're a product manager for Copilot or Claude or Perplexity or something like that, those are your direct competitors. The reality is for most sales professionals, marketing professionals, founders, entrepreneurs, go-to-market leaders, commercial revenue officers throughout the data center ecosystem, the chat apps are non-business model competitors. They have a phenomenal way of educating and building trust with your prioritized buyer personas, with your ideal clients, with your addressable marketplace, because people are getting instant gratification. No more clicking on the 10 blue links and figuring things out. You get instant answers. Even better, it's like the perfect relationship partner, like the perfect spouse that they perfectly anticipate what you want to know next. And this is something that we've really seen. We're only like in the second or third year of these platforms going mainstream, and already I can't remember the last time that I had a search that it didn't have a phenomenal idea of what I should want to do next. It gives you the answer, and then it gives you, do you want to do this? Or here's 3 options, choose the one that works best for you. It doesn't just give you an answer and leave you hanging or leave you figuring out what to do next. No, it literally prompts you for, this is what I think is the best option. Should I proceed? What's super interesting about all that? That's the exact same idea of how Google and Meta and Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube over the years have figured out a way to improve their average minutes of session time per day per user. And if you've ever talked to someone that runs social media for your company and they've lamented the idea that they can no longer exclude links back to your website in Facebook posts or LinkedIn posts without being severely penalized by the algorithm, the reason those platforms are doing that is they want to keep you there all day long. YouTube phenomenally prioritizes publishers, creators that are able to successfully keep people not necessarily on your channel, but on their platform. In other words, if you brought a visitor in and that visitor stayed on your platform for hours, binging and binging and binging more and more content, that looks really, really good for your channel as the one that brought them in. So they don't want you to leave. In the same way, the chat apps, ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity, Claude, they very, very strongly want you to stay there all day long. They would love to have you have these conversations that go on, not for several minutes, but for several hours, because they keep figuring out, and then what, and then what, and then what. So the natural thing that everyone wants to know is, how do you get the generative AI apps, the platforms, to recommend your company when someone goes in there? And it's a lot of the same strategy that you've used over the last couple of years. The trust signals are very, very similar, getting really, really client-centric, providing a ton of value, and be one of the most authoritative sources. Now, the challenge is, in a lot of cases, you're not going to get the click-through. Sure, they'll cite you, but only a small percentage of people will. So it's a discovery engine. The people that do click through, it's much smaller numbers, are phenomenally qualified, though. We see dramatic amounts of sales cycle acceleration with the lower volume of buyers that come in there. But if you're to the point where you're like flogging your digital marketing team and complaining about, why is our SEO traffic down? Why are our Google ads not working nearly as well? It's because everything has shifted in the last couple of years, from traditional search habits to ChatGPT. Do you know many people now that still search the way they did 2, 3, 4 years ago? I sure as heck don't. I wouldn't consider myself a super early adopter with this. I think what's phenomenal in watching the generative AI chat apps is it's now reached the tipping point with like mainstream adoption, to the point of like, my parents and their friends that are in their 80s have already changed their habits, and they do like kind of like how they behave on Facebook is different than how Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, like my kids, make fun of how we use Facebook as Gen X. But the tipping points have already happened. Like, so if you're thinking that buyer behaviors haven't, and these for the most part, you're talking about people that have been retired out of the workforce for years already. So like the baby boomers that are still active in the data center ecosystem are all digitally transformed. So like when people give me this pushback of like, I don't know if our buyers are like this, like, ask them. I have yet to find significant companies in the data center ecosystem with any of their prioritized buyer personas that haven't already seen this massive amount of disruption to traditional playbooks. So when it comes to reaching out to buyers at an earlier buying stage, to me, what it's all about is getting those buyers to learn and grow with you and your team. Is figuring out for your most important buyer personas what's going on in their world, what are those 10 or 12 big goals and challenges that they're struggling with, and inviting them to come to your breakfast seminars, your lunch and learns, your after hours education and training events, your webinars, if it's not practical for them to come in person. Of course, record all of this to make it available on demand and to help it spread even more with multiple team members. But that's what it's all about for the earlier buying stage. And most important is early and often. It's not enough to just get in there once. You can have a phenomenally valuable keynote speaking slot or breakout session at the perfect national conference, the perfect attendees and everything, and it still only counts as one touch point. What are you going to do to get in on as many of those other 27 touch points as possible? I hope it's not keeping your fingers crossed, because if that's your strategy, someone else that understands how much the world has changed is going to beat your butt. They're going to beat you to the punch. It's not, if you really want to compete and win, early and often is so important, incredibly important to make sure that we're not asleep at the wheel on all of this. Your buyer preferences have changed, strongly favoring self-service. And the only way that you're going to get in there at an earlier stage is to get out of the vendor box, get off your high horse, stop pretending that there's still a place for traditional account executives and account managers and marketers. Nearly all that are going to survive and thrive are very rapidly repositioning themselves to be seen more like consultants and teachers and trusted advisors and subject matter experts. I had a mid-level executive from one of the big 3 public cloud providers come to me and do a consultation last summer, maybe a little over a year ago. And the primary ask was he wanted help to be seen on LinkedIn as a program that's now been sunsetted, called, it was LinkedIn Top Voice or something like that, which was a little bit of algorithm, a little bit of human review, but answering so many questions that he was rated as a top voice. But he said the even bigger thing he's been struggling with on why he's losing deals is because his biggest competitor from one of the other big 3 cloud providers has a book. They've written a bylined book and he doesn't. And he knows after he gets LinkedIn Top Voice, which would have been a vanity exercise. We talked about why I would build a more endurable platform than just chasing that platform, which case in point is less than 18 months later and that program's dead. I think it's dead anyway. I haven't seen much of it lately. But what he's biasing to thinking, and what's really causing him to be not competitive, is he doesn't have a byline book. A trade paperback, the kind of trade paperbacks that have been around with IT executives for 25 plus years. Heck, I wrote a book for Microsoft Press back when the books had CD-ROMs glued in the back in 99. It came out in late 99. So more than 25 years ago. So this is the thing that, for thought leadership, for credibility, for subject matter expertise. I'm not telling everyone who's watching this to go out immediately and start your own podcast and do a phenomenal webinar program and write a book and everything, but I am telling you that these are competitive battlegrounds in a self-driven buyer's journey. And the better job you do with educating and building trust, the more you're going to help to shape the criteria that your prospects and clients use to evaluate all of the alternatives that are in front of them. You can either be out in front of this and be proactive and own the conversation, or you can be playing defense and treading water immediately and only get the clients that no one else wants and being forced to compete on price. If you truly want to differentiate, if you want to competitively position, if you want to understand the reality of winning in the earlier, in the middle, and the later parts of the journey throughout the full 100% of the buyer's journey, getting in early and often, super important. Educating and building trust, super important. The right people, the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see you and your client-facing team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything that's directly and indirectly related to your category. So that's how I would approach how to reach out to data center buyers at an earlier buying stage. Is I want to be the ones that are providing their learning and development and professional development throughout the full buyer's journey, early and often. If you're getting good value so far from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure to spread the love by hitting the like button on whatever platform that you're watching on. Okay, what is up next? Now we're going to head back into the data center technology part of the ecosystem. So how do we get clients for data center network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure? How do we get clients for network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure? So we're in the cabling and connectivity part of data center technology. At DCSMI, we track 22 different data center technology related business models, of which cabling and connectivity is definitely a really important part of that. So this particular company specializes in low voltage and network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure, and they want to get more clients. So a lot of what to do next depends on how much clarity you have around your ideal client profile, your prioritized buyer personas, how strong your sense is of product market fit. If you know exactly where these clients are located, and you know how big or small they are, and you know what industries they're in, it becomes a lot more straightforward to build a go-to-market playbook to help you get those clients. So when it comes to network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure, unlike some other parts of data center technology, you're almost certainly going to be going on site to those clients, you or someone from your team or your contractors or something like that. So the geographic part of the ideal client profile becomes incredibly important. It's really hard to install network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure in a data center facility if you don't have the ability to travel cost effectively and promptly to be able to get there initially and on an ongoing basis for maintenance, support, troubleshooting that comes up. So the geographic part of that is really important. And again, you'll answer that based on the presence, your manufacturing presence, where you have employees and contractors and channel partners located who could potentially carry the ball forward with that. Company size is another big one too. And again, depending on your company size, depending on the nature of what you sell to them, how big or small your minimums are, how much your product line is oriented towards like smaller data center operators and smaller facilities versus mid-size versus huge campus kinds of facilities. Again, these are product roadmap decisions that you hopefully have made deliberately over time, as opposed to the marketplace kind of assigning you these priorities in your product roadmap over time. But a lot of your product roadmap decisions and resource decisions will dictate just how much it makes sense to tackle various different sizes of potential data center operators and data center end users, of whether you're going to primarily do network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure with smaller companies. Like these could be companies that are anywhere from like 10 employees up to like 200 employees or 500 employees, or how comfortable you feel in the mid-market. That might be anywhere from like 200 employees up to 1,000 employees or 5,000 employees, and how comfortable your company is with marketing, selling, servicing, and installing network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure in true enterprises with tens of thousands or potentially even hundreds of thousands of employees, like Fortune 500 kind of companies. And again, you know your product roadmap, you know your entry points, you know where you start to hit the resistance, you know where you've had product market fit and where you've struggled to have product market fit. All those get baked into what you do with documenting that ideal client profile. A lot of times there's clues on your website. If we look at your testimonials, your reviews, your logos, your case studies, that kind of stuff, that'll help us get clarity on not only the geographic part, but the company size as well. In this particular part of data center technology, cabling and fiber optic infrastructure, the industry targeting may not be as big of a deal as like a data center operator or a software company or storage company or infrastructure company where there's going to be a lot more compliance demands. There can in some cases still be that to a certain degree, but it's not in many parts of the world. It's not going to be quite as challenging with regulated industries as other kinds of business models. But again, over time, for your particular geographic region, maybe there are some certifications and credentialing that you need to have to be successful in that particular business model for certain kinds of regulated industries. So know that for your particular geographic markets where you do business. If there's industries that you want to focus on, those are inclusions in your ideal client profile. If there's ones where you get knocked out prematurely because a regulated industry requires it and you don't have those capabilities, well, that needs to be in there as an exclusion as well. Those inclusions and exclusions become super important with your lead generation when it comes to like your cold outbound strategy, when it comes to your ad strategy, like if you're using LinkedIn Campaign Manager to run LinkedIn ads, or you're doing LinkedIn Sales Navigator doing outbound, also becomes those inclusions and exclusions become super important when it comes to like website copywriting, having a website page for each industry that you want to focus on, obviously not having a website page for industries that you don't want to focus on. But the exclusions also become important when you have drop-down lists. Because, for example, if there's certain regulated industries where you know you're going to get knocked out prematurely, you still want to know about that because you want to filter them out. You don't want to send the lead to sales. You want to use your segmentation, your filtering, your query kind of strategy, and your CRM to deprioritize that kind of lead if you know that you're going to get knocked out prematurely. So yeah, having clarity at the geographic, company size, and industry level is super important. And then the personas. In those kinds of accounts, who's the most important stakeholder, the second most important kind of stakeholder, it could be a tertiary kind of stakeholder. And again, a lot of how granular that is depends on how big your company is, how big their company is. Obviously, in smaller companies, you have people that wear lots of different hats. So there's fewer job title, job function kind of segmentations that go on. And in massive enterprise companies, you have a lot more specialization, a lot more segmentation that happens. And you typically need to end up with a lot more buyer personas that you're segmenting and personalizing around. And in nearly all cases for network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure, most companies at some point will have channel partners, different kinds of channel partners, depending on what you do versus what they do. But for this particular category, it'd be super common to have relationships with like network integrators, managed service providers, value-added resellers, master agents, distributors, manufacturers, reps. Again, depends on their business model, your business model, how big or small your companies are. But yeah, that's some of the segmentation strategy that you'd want to use. And in terms of getting clients, if you want to get out of the vendor box, if you don't want to just be seen as a commodity broker, if you want to have the opportunity to really sell solutions and professional services that put you up much higher on the value chain, lead with education, lead with trust building, as opposed to just selling SKUs. Because if you're just selling SKUs already, most people in a self-driven journey are going to tell you they don't want, why are you even paying for salespeople anymore? What value are they adding? Well, you can just put this on the website, have a shopping cart and a buy now button. What do we need you? The reality is if you're a career sales professional in and around telecommunications, cabling, connectivity, network infrastructure, network cabling, fiber optic, at this stage of the game, to preserve your relevance, to preserve your value, both to your company and your clients, a lot of what you likely want to be thinking about to transform yourself is to be seen more like a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as an expert, as a subject matter expert. That's why increasingly we're seeing so many employers in this space, chief revenue officers, chief commercial officers, CEOs, depending on the company size, hiring subject matter experts that look that are basically peers of the buyer personas that they're selling to. So let's say, for example, you worked as an IT infrastructure executive for a mid-sized telecommunication company. Well, all of a sudden, like when you go call on other IT infrastructure professionals in these companies, you have a lot of rapport with them that a career salesperson wouldn't necessarily have with them because they see you as a peer. You understand what their job is like. You understand how their team is set up. You understand what they're really struggling with. You understand the full ecosystem. We're seeing that happen across the board, across the full data center ecosystem. So if you don't fit that, how do you kind of retrofit yourself into that? What I would look at is, as you do your buyer persona research and you start to figure out the training and certification credentials that your core buyer personas have, think about getting some of those yourself. It doesn't have to be the most advanced ones. It could be the entry-level ones to start, but think about what you can do either on your own time or getting your employer to give you a little bit of budget for this, or a little bit of both. What can you do to level up your skills so you have some at least entry-level credentials that look like the kind of credentials that your buyers would have, if not personally, but at least some of the junior members on their team? That gives you enormous amounts of street cred. I can't overemphasize enough how valuable that can be. If you have an employer that gives you some kind of budget for professional development, for sure, take advantage of that. If you don't, you may even want to think about investing some amount of your own budget to be able to do that, to protect your own career for credentialing with all that. The next excuse that usually comes up beyond budget is you don't have time. Let's talk about the time elephant that everyone thinks that is sitting on their shoulders, preventing them from doing this. So let's talk about time. So my question is, do you go to the gym? Yes. How many times a week do you go to the gym? I don't know. You go to the gym 3 times a week and you're there for 30 minutes. So you got 90 minutes a week, 50 weeks of the year. You're probably not, every once in a while you'll get sick or there's bad weather or something like that. You may not get there 100% of the time, but it sounds an awful lot like you have 150 gym workouts over the course of the year, 75 hours, roughly 75 hours over the course of the year. I'm going to even give you half credit and say that half of the time you go, you're just not in the mood to listen to work-related stuff and you want to just put on your favorite playlist of music. For me, it might be like 80s workout music. But let's say even of those 75 hours, you spend 30 of them on professional development. Are there any entry-level courses you could take where you could get through the course in 30 hours? Oh yeah, for sure. Could you get through a couple of entry-level courses in 30 hours? Keep nodding your head. That's the workout routine. If you go biking around your neighborhood, go jogging around your neighborhood, remember, you don't have to necessarily be able to watch a lot of training. There's certain kinds of training in this category, network cabling and fiber infrastructure, where being able to watch the videos could add a lot of value. But the first time through, if you're going to listen 2 times through, a lot of times just listening to it. Do you have commuting time where you're commuting into the office, where you're commuting, driving between clients? Could be a couple hundred hours a year. Let's say it's 5 hours a week, 40 weeks of the year. Again, sometimes the traffic is a bear. Sometimes you don't want to pay attention to work stuff and you just want to listen to some music. And a podcast or training just isn't the thing that's going to get it done, but you still dozens of hours over the course of the year. So workout time, commuting time. What about business travel? How many times are you sitting at the gate or the club at the airport waiting for a flight? Dozens of hours a year. How many times are you on a flight where you could download the MP4, the MP3 file to your phone or your laptop and listen? Again, it's all how resourceful you want to be in getting this done. Getting that credential is a huge, huge part of keeping you relevant, keeping you in the game, and being able to cross over the threshold from vendor to trusted advisor, to get out of being seen as a traditional sales rep, a traditional account executive, a traditional account manager, and being seen a lot more like a teacher, a consultant, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert. So if you have an employer who's encouraging you to do this, take advantage of the resources. Maybe you have $1,000 a year in budget or something like that to pay for some of these courses and some of these certifications. If you don't, I would encourage you to, obviously there's more resourceful ways to do it and less resourceful ways to be able to do it, but at least entry-level certifications will keep you in the game longer with having a stronger sense of credibility with your prospects and clients seeing you as an expert. So in terms of getting clients for data center, network cabling, and fiber optic infrastructure, figure out how you can be seen as a peer. Figure out how you can show up and look a lot more like the instructor, the teacher, the consultants. For most parts of the playbook that I talk with people about on a regular basis, what can you do to have a podcast of your own? What can you do to run phenomenal webinars, phenomenal breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, where you're teaching best practices and you're demoing best practices on network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure and taking them around your lab, taking them around your own data center and showing them how this all plays out in the field. The more you do that with the right people, in the right companies, multiple stakeholders from the decision committee, the more magical things start to happen with very naturally generating fantastic sales opportunities, fantastic pipeline, and getting the inside track about what's really, really going on inside of the company because they trust you. That's the key thing with all of this. They have to trust you. And the best way to educate and build trust is to educate and build trust, not trying to bribe them with sports tickets or parties or golf tournaments or something like that. You're selling to technical, skeptical, cynical, sales allergic kind of buyers and channel partners. Don't try to pull the wool over their eyes. It's so, so incredibly important that you earn your way in as opposed to bribe and force your way in. Earn your way in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so they see you as the be-all end expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with network cabling and fiber optic infrastructure. And it doesn't need to necessarily just be you. It could be you and other members of your team. Maybe you're pretty junior and you're aspiring to get this entry-level training and credentialing in the next 6 months to a year, but there's multiple solutions engineers, system engineers, product managers, network architects, CTOs, whatever it is that are part of your company that you can bring in as guest experts. Bring them in as guest experts, and you're the host, you're the moderator, you're the concierge that brings all these great resources together. It doesn't all have to be you. It takes a village, it takes a team. There's a team on your side, there's a team on your side. And these are big culture changes. If you're getting pushback from your own boss, this needs to start at a very, very high level in your company. If you're with a company that has less than a few hundred employees, like sub 200 employees, this should start all the way at the CEO level. If you're in a much larger company, like a true enterprise with thousands of employees, it's probably your division director, your division VP or something like that, or your subsidiaries managing director or something like that. But make no mistake, for a lot of companies, these are big, big culture changes. If you're still running marketing and sales like you did 10 years ago, it's not going to get it done anymore. There's been way too much change in the last couple of years. It's not just about the expansion because of density and growing amounts of facilities and everything in the hockey stick growth throughout the data center ecosystem. It's that their preferences have changed quite drastically. And the self-driven journey is really throwing a lot of people for a loop, really posing a big curveball. I want you to be on the right side of this. I want you to figure out how you can stay in the game as long as possible. I want you to figure out how you can stay relevant, how you can add value to your prospects and clients and channel partners in a dramatically remarkable way relative to all the other schmoes that you compete with. And I know you likely have a lot of esteem for some of your competitors, maybe they're even former coworkers, but at the end of the day, I want to focus on how you and your team can provide enormous amounts of education and trust building to your most important buyer personas and your most important target companies. Educate and build trust early and often. That's what I'd be focusing on for getting clients for a data center, network cabling, and fiber optic infrastructure company. And that brings us to our final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, which is, and this brings us back to the data center facilities and technology part of the data center ecosystem. Decommissioning, data center decommissioning, the first cousin of data center recycling and IT asset disposition, ITAD. So how do we find big data center decommissioning opportunities? How do we find big data center decommissioning opportunities? So what commissioning refers to is when you're building a brand new data center, these are the companies and the teams that go in and basically coordinate everything that needs to be done from in between the point of like construction to the point of that data center being ready to move in the racks and cabinets and servers and get everything up and running. That's commissioning. Decommissioning is the opposite of that. Decommissioning is the data center operator. The enterprise has decided they're going to shut down this data center as of this date, and you've been hired to clear out all the equipment and liquidate all the equipment. And in the case of like facilities related equipment, like chillers and generators and everything, there's certain best practices and certain amounts of expertise to do that the right way, and flooring and whatever else you're doing to physically remove from the facility. And in the case of technology, there's a lot of best practices on how to do that the right way safely as well, like secure data center, secure data destruction, drive wiping. We've had a lot of fantastic people on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast that specialize in various facets of it, like very, very early on. I think he was the very first guest we ever had on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast was John Clayton from Blanco Technology Group that specializes in secure data erasure. Had Josh Heath from WipeOS, also specializing in that. Had Nathan Foley from DMD Systems Recovery. They specialize in IT asset disposition for both data centers and traditional offices. So we've had a lot of experts talk about this particular facet, this particular life cycle stage of what happens to data centers when they're obviously, Rich Kenny too from the UK talking about best practices around sustainably recycling and second use of data center hardware during data center decommissions. We'll include links to all of these in the show notes that goes along with this podcast. So what do you do to find big data center decommissioning opportunities? And I think a lot of this is being very deliberate about where you've won the best, where you've had the greatest success, where your clients have had the greatest success in the past, and then using that as a clone, using that as a template for what to do going forward. So when you look at your website case studies, when you look at your logos, when you look at your reviews, when you look at your testimonials, when you look inside your CRM, what kinds of commonalities do you see among your most successful clients? Where do they tend to be located? Location is a really, really big deal when it comes to decommissioning a data center, because you need to physically go there. Of course, you're doing site surveys and walkthroughs and plans and everything ahead of time, but you're going to be sending team members and trucks and whatever it is to deinstall and cart the stuff out securely. And in the case of equipment, you're likely going to have technicians on site doing secure data destruction and having that be witnessed by people from the client side. So physical proximity on the geographic side is super important part of the ideal client profile. Also is company size. Like what your minimum engagement is. And what's interesting too, is when you look at decommissioning and data center recycling and IT asset disposition, most get paid for the service, but there's some that primarily do the work for free in return for getting access to that equipment, because the equipment has a lot of value. And then they basically set up like an e-commerce store on their site and they market that equipment. There's a lot of different business models and how to approach this, but they all rely on having proximity and being able to physically travel there to that particular facility multiple times throughout the course of the decommissioning engagement. It's very rare that you would sell this remotely and just go in there one day and do everything. I guess in theory with a smaller facility, maybe you are in and out of there in a day or two or something like that. But more than likely, this is a relationship where you're going in and out multiple times ahead of the facility being decommissioned to build a relationship and get the information that you need from the key stakeholders, and then having you and multiple team members, whoever's participating from your team. So the proximity again is super, super important. Company size, you know what your minimums are, you know what your maximums are. How big do they need to be to make it worth your while? At what point is it so large that it overwhelms your capacity? And maybe you're a big enough company that there's no company size that would overwhelm your capacity, but maybe if it's a smaller company, there are realistic limits. And maybe your sweet spot is companies that have anywhere from, say, 50 employees up to 5,000 employees or something like that. Obviously, when it comes to decommissioning, square meters is definitely something you're going to pay attention to. Kilowatts and megawatts is something you're going to pay attention to. But when it comes to prospecting and outbound and ads and creating awareness and lead generation and qualifying and everything like that, company headcount, number of employees definitely is something that comes up relevant, regardless of whether you're doing the decom jobs for data center operators or colo or hyperscale or even enterprises that have their own data centers. Industry verticals, yeah, for sure is going to be an issue, because in most cases where you're dealing with the IT assets, there's a lot of data sitting on those drives, on those SSDs, on the storage attached, on the network attached, on the arrays and everything. And yeah, they're not going to want your team members touching that data if they aren't confident that you have the credentials and the certifications and the qualifications to be around that data for that kind of regulated industry. So yeah, for sure, depending on where you're located, there are credentials and certifications and compliance things that you need to have invested in or be continuing to invest in for that particular industry, for that particular vertical. If that's the case, make sure that's noted in your ideal client profile. If there's regulated industries where you get knocked out because you don't have those, make note of that as well, because with working efficiently with finding the right opportunities, we want to make sure to target the specific ones and specifically exclude the ones that aren't a good fit. And then within those opportunities, that within that ideal client profile, who are the personas that matter most, the smaller the data center, the more likely it is that you're going all the way to the top. The bigger the company, the more likely it is that your direct relationship will probably be more like a mid-level executive and their team and their direct reports. So again, know your company size, know your company size, their company size, where you actually fit in. And that will be super important, not just for the ideal client profile, but that'll be important for figuring out how many personas you need. And then within those personas, when it comes to decommissioning, what are they trying to get done? What are they struggling with the most? And how can you add value to their research and decision-making process to get in there as early as possible and as often as possible as the go-to resource when it comes to anything and everything they need to learn to have a successful data center decommissioning out of that particular facility and any other facilities that they have going forward. You want to be seen as the go-to resource, be an integral, get out of the data center decommissioning vendor box and be seen more as the data center decommissioning learning and development, professional development resource that teaches that individual and their coworkers on their team about what they need to know about how other individuals in similar companies and similar job roles in similar company sizes, similar industries have approached these exact issues. The better job you can do with being the one who's teaching and educating and being seen as a trusted advisor and a subject matter expert, perhaps even a thought leader, the better off all of this goes. So that's what I'd be thinking about for finding big data center decommissioning opportunities, is define what big actually is, make it as concrete as possible. Use that definition of that ideal client profile to build out a defined target account list for your specific geographic market. And it could end up being as big as a couple dozen companies. Maybe it's a couple hundred companies if you have a national footprint. And within those couple dozen or those couple hundred companies, know who the key people are in those companies and their direct reports, their teams or organizations that are going to weigh in on a data center decommissioning initiative. And I want you not to saturate them by nagging them. I want you to saturate them by inviting them to amazingly impactful educational events and giving them amazingly impactful educational resources that help them do their job better, so they can see how other people in similar companies with similar job roles, similar job functions have overcome these exact goals, have overcome these exact challenges. Basically, be the purveyor, be the gatekeeper, be the one who sets the stage, the foundation for what the best practices look like for a great world-class data center decommissioning project. So that's what I'd be thinking about for how to find big data center decommissioning opportunities, regardless of whether you classify your company as data center decommissioning, data center recycling, IT asset disposition, or perhaps you supply software, hardware, professional services that supports data center decommissioning, data center recycling, and IT asset and disposition. Actually, even some of the people that I've talked to in that space work with a lot of managed service providers that are adjacent to that, as well as some of the first boots on the ground that figure out what's going to happen with an upcoming data center decommissioning project. There's a lot of sources of influence who know that a data center commissioning project is going to happen months, sometimes even years out. So this is part of your food chain, part of your ecosystem. I'm very, very, very partial to having educational events and podcasts and webinars and panels with the very people that can be phenomenal referral sources for building your pipeline with finding these big data center decommissioning opportunities, in addition to the direct playbook of going direct to the stakeholders and their team members and their direct reports that are involved in these. But that's what I'd be thinking about for finding big data center decommissioning opportunities going forward in today's self-driven data center marketplace. So that's the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We're so glad that you're able to join us for this week. If you've gotten good value, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you're watching on a platform that allows you to rate and review us, please do that as well. If you have an idea for a topic or a question or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming episode, be sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching on. We'll add that to the consideration queue for an upcoming show. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources like this, be sure to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe for free directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. I'm Joshua Feinberg, founder of the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. If you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn and you would like to be, make sure to mention in the connection invite that you've watched and that you're a fan of Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, and I'd be happy to be connected with you on LinkedIn. And while we're talking about LinkedIn, if you have an idea for a guest that you think we should host an upcoming interview with on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, if you and I are connected on LinkedIn, that's a great place to introduce that person as well. So again, so glad that you're able to join us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We wish you great success in growing your impact, your team's impact, and your company's impact throughout this amazing period of growth throughout the global data center, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities ecosystem. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you back again next time. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.